Our relationship, I think at that point, things were coming down on us pretty hard, and we started to take care of each other a lot more.
Yeah. We did 72, though.
There is a moment in television history that almost nobody caught when it first happened. It aired live, it was broadcast into millions of American living rooms, and the people responsible for making sure nothing controversial ever made it onto the screen completely missed it. CBS had an army of censors. They reviewed scripts line by line. They flagged words, reviewed camera angles, and screened full tapes days before anything went to air. And yet, on one ordinary Sunday night in the fall of 1967, something slipped through. Something that, once you see it, you cannot unsee. We are going to talk about that moment today. But to really understand why it matters, you have to understand the world it came from. Because the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour was not just a TV show. It was a war, fought in plain sight, with jokes as weapons and cameras as battlegrounds. Let us start at the very beginning, because the story of Tom and Dick Smothers does not begin on a soundstage. It begins with loss. Their father, Major Thomas B. Smothers, Jr., was a United States Army officer stationed in the Philippines when Japan launched its invasion in 1941. His wife Ruth and their 2 young sons were evacuated to safety. Major Smothers was not so lucky. He was captured by Japanese forces and forced to endure the Bataan Death March, one of the most horrific episodes of the entire Pacific War. He survived that. He survived a transfer to Fukuoka Prison Camp No. 22 in Japan, a brutal facility where prisoners were worked to exhaustion and treated with savage indifference. He survived years of captivity. But in April 1945, with the war almost over and liberation just months away, his body finally gave out. He was moved from the camp and never made it to his destination. Of the 110 men transferred with him, only 36 lived. Major Smothers was the last to die. Tom was 7 years old. Dick was 6. Their mother Ruth raised both boys alone in California, working long hours to keep them fed and clothed. There was no cushion, no comfort, and no easy road. That childhood shaped everything. The way Tom leaned into vulnerability on stage, the way Dick played the put-upon straight man, the way they argued and poked at each other in front of crowds, all of it had roots in a childhood where they only had each other. Comedy, for them, was never just performance. It was survival translated into something the rest of the world could laugh at. They first found their audience in 1959 at the Purple Onion, a small folk music club in San Francisco. The original booking was 2 weeks. They ended up staying for 36. Audiences could not get enough of the unusual combination of folk songs and brotherly bickering. One night, a flamenco dancer was injured before her set and the brothers had to fill her slot on the spot. Rather than panic, they improvised and the crowd went wild. That moment told them everything they needed to know about themselves. They had something that could not be taught. By the end of their run, they were earning $2,000 a week. A few months earlier, they had been making $2 a night. Their debut album, recorded live at the Purple Onion and released in 1961, launched them into a national conversation. Tom Smothers had originally formed a college group called the Casual Quintet. Dick taught himself to play bass just to be part of it. The other members drifted away one by one. The brothers kept going. They started telling jokes between songs simply to fill dead air. That filler became their identity, and that identity became their career. Their trademark was deceptively simple. On stage, Tom played the wide-eyed, innocent brother who was constantly confused and secretly wounded. Dick played the logical, exasperated older voice of reason. They argued. They sniped. Tom would look out at the audience with that famous, helpless expression and say that their mother always liked Dick best. And the audience would explode. It was not scripted sadness dressed up as comedy. It was real family pain turned into something communal. People laughed because they recognized it. That honesty was the secret ingredient that no network executive could manufacture, no matter how hard they tried. By the mid-1960s, CBS was in real trouble on Sunday nights. NBC's Bonanza was pulling in roughly a quarter of all American television viewers every week. It had already destroyed 2 solid CBS programs in the same time slot. The network executives were desperate enough to try something they had never seriously considered before, giving a pair of young, unconventional comedians total creative control over a prime-time variety hour. Tom had asked for that control during negotiations. CBS, staring down ratings disaster, agreed. They hoped the Smothers Brothers could pull in younger viewers and make the network feel relevant again. What CBS got was far more than they bargained for. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour premiered on February 5, 1967. Within 2 weeks it had defeated Bonanza in the ratings. Younger viewers flooded in. Advertisers were thrilled. But almost immediately, Tom and Dick began using that platform in ways that made the CBS boardroom deeply uncomfortable. They invited folk singers who openly opposed the Vietnam War. They made jokes at President Lyndon Johnson's expense. They tackled civil rights, the counterculture, and the generation gap with a directness that American network television had simply never seen before. Every week felt like a dare. Their writing staff was equally fearless. Young writers who went on to change American comedy forever, among them Steve Martin, Rob Reiner, Lorne Michaels, and David Steinberg, cut their teeth in those writers' rooms. The show's influence can be traced in a direct line to Saturday Night Live, All in the Family, and dozens of other landmarks that came later. CBS censors fought them constantly. The brothers fought back even harder, and they were clever about it. They made the censorship itself into material. Tom played a censor in one sketch, gleefully chopping up scripts with giant scissors and cutting performers off in the middle of their lines. The final punchline was total silence on screen, a blank, empty broadcast. CBS refused to air it. They found it too embarrassing. Elaine May appeared in a similar sketch whose final line cut deeper still, pointing out that if you are not allowed to say anything that matters, you are just running a distraction. CBS cut that too. Every cut just gave the brothers more ammunition. The audience understood perfectly well what was happening, and that understanding only made them more loyal. It was in this atmosphere of constant creative warfare that the incident involving Pete Seeger became one of the defining moments of the show's legacy. Seeger had been effectively banned from American television for nearly 17 years, a casualty of the political blacklist that had swept through entertainment in the 1950s. Tom invited him on the show in 1967 to perform Waist Deep in the Big Muddy, a folk song that everyone understood was a pointed critique of President Johnson's Vietnam policy. CBS censors reviewed the tape and cut the song before it could air. Tom did not accept that quietly. He spoke to journalists. The story reached the press. Public outrage was significant enough that CBS was forced to back down. On February 25, 1968, millions of Americans finally watched Pete Seeger perform that song uncensored on national television. It was the first time a blacklisted artist had addressed a sitting president so directly on mainstream TV. It was a crack in a wall that had been standing for 2 decades. The show also did something extraordinary for rock music. On October 6, 1968, the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour aired the Beatles' promotional film for Hey Jude. This was the first time American audiences had ever experienced what we now call a music video. The promotional film had been shot at Twickenham Studios just a month earlier, on September 4. Paul McCartney had personally designed the set. A full orchestra in white tuxedos played alongside the band. 300 extras sang the final chorus together. Ringo Starr had just returned to the group after briefly quitting, so the whole production carried an undercurrent of fragile reunion. The following week, the show aired the promotional film for Revolution. 2 Beatles films in 2 consecutive weeks. No other program could do this. The Smothers Brothers had access that Ed Sullivan, for all his prestige, simply did not have. It was a preview of an entirely new relationship between music and television. And then there was September 17, 1967. The night The Who took the stage. Keith Moon had been building toward something for years, and he chose the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour as the place to do it. The band was scheduled to perform My Generation, a song already loaded with generational defiance. But Moon had decided, entirely on his own and without telling anyone including his own bandmates, to load his kick drum with an amount of explosive flash powder far beyond anything that had been discussed or approved. What happened next became one of the most legendary moments in rock history, but it is important to sit with the full weight of what actually occurred that night. When the song reached its climax, the drum kit detonated. The explosion was not a pop or a theatrical bang. It was a full, percussive concussive blast that sent smoke and shrapnel across the stage. A piece of cymbal flew through the air and struck Moon in the arm, knocking him backward off his stool. Pete Townsend, standing at the front of the stage, was hit by a wave of sound so powerful that it instantly caused damage to his hearing. The audience, which had been cheering and screaming throughout the performance, went momentarily silent from sheer shock before erupting again. Bystanders near the stage later described the noise as something closer to a small bomb than anything associated with entertainment. Townsend would go on to lose nearly 90% of the hearing in one ear. The ringing never fully stopped. Decades later, in interviews across many years, he spoke honestly about how the damage changed his life and complicated his ability to play. It was the price of one moment of spectacle, and he paid it for the rest of his life. But amid the smoke and the chaos and the ringing ears, something else happened. Something the cameras were not supposed to catch. Something the CBS censors, who reviewed every frame with professional suspicion, somehow did not see until it was already gone. In the background, in the confusion of smoke and scrambling stagehands and musicians still processing what had just detonated in front of them, the camera captured something. The details of what exactly was visible have been discussed and debated by fans and television historians for decades. But those who have gone back to examine the footage carefully, who have paused and rewound and looked again at the edges of the frame rather than the center, know that this was not just a performance. Something was there that was never meant to be seen. Whether it was a stagehand's reaction, an inadvertent gesture, a sign held up in the chaos, or something else entirely, the censors missed it. And once you go back and look, really look, you understand why this moment has lived in the margins of rock and television history for over 50 years. Townsend, in the seconds after the explosion, grabbed Tom Smothers' acoustic guitar from the side of the stage and smashed it to pieces. Tom stood there and stared, too stunned to speak, too surprised even to be properly angry. It was the perfect visual ending to a moment that had already gone further than anyone had planned. That guitar became a symbol, not just of the Who's commitment to destruction as art, but of the entire spirit of what the Smothers Brothers were doing every week. They were handing their stage to people who would tear it apart, and they were doing it on purpose. The show's relationship with political power grew more intense as the months went on. President Johnson, by multiple accounts, was losing sleep over it. He reportedly called CBS executives personally, at unreasonable hours, to demand they bring the brothers under control. When Nixon took office in early 1969, the pressure intensified further. The brothers responded by pushing harder. Dick's impression of Nixon, delivered in March 1969, included a line about the Vietnam War having an off switch that nobody could find. It was a small joke. It was a devastating one. CBS and its nervous sponsors had reached their limit. The cancellation came on April 4, 1969. CBS used a technical excuse about a missed tape submission deadline, but nobody was fooled. The show was in the top 10 nationally. It had been renewed just weeks before. An already completed episode featuring David Steinberg performing anti-war material was pulled entirely and never broadcast in the United States. It aired in Canada instead. Major sponsors including Ford and Procter & Gamble had been pulling their advertising for months, and internally, CBS executives had been documenting sponsor pressure as the central reason for their decision. Tom Smothers later reflected that winning in court, which they eventually did in 1973 after a 4-year legal battle that resulted in a judgment of over $700,000 in their favor, still felt like losing. The platform was gone. The moment had passed. The cultural window they had opened, and defended, and bled for, had been closed. CBS replaced them with Hee Haw, a wholesome rural comedy show with no satire, no politics, and no danger. It ran for 23 seasons. The lesson the network had taught the industry was clear. Controversy has a cost, safety is profitable, and even the most popular show in the country can be sacrificed if it makes the wrong people uncomfortable. The Smothers Brothers tried again